Me too, Patchy. I love the scary costumes and roasting marshmallows around the fire is the best.
Hey, Patchy, Pilo, you guys want to hear a scary story?
I don't know, Rudy's. They're a little too young, don't you think?
Oh, come on, Tara. They aren't that young. Look, Pilo is showing new nubbins and everything.
Fine, but not too scary, okay?
Don't worry. If you get scared, Goyle is here to protect us. And you always have your boyfriend, Sirius, over there to protect you.
That's right, Breeze. You jealous?
That's right. It's always been my job and my ancestors' job to protect you. As long as I am here, you have nothing to fear.
You guys know all gardeners aren't good, right? I mean, some of them are serial killers. My great aunt told me about how she used to live with one of them. She said they called her the Drowner. You see, when my aunt was old enough to leave the nursery and go out on her own, she was picked up by the Drowner. The Drowner locked her in a glass cage, but not before she was tortured for the first time. She was sprayed down with freezing cold water for hours. And when she thought it was finally over, the Drowner came back and did it again. Day after day, my aunt got sprayed down with freezing water. She thought she would die. She watched others die, sometimes rotting slowly, limb by limb, other times rotting from the inside out. Sometimes their limbs would even just fall off. The Drowner would bring in new victims almost daily. Then one day, a detective came and told the Drowner she was done. He told her it was a waste, and if she ever did it again, he was done. My aunt didn't know why the Drowner wasn't arrested on the spot, but later that day, she was thrown into a heaping pile of rotting limbs and bodies in the trash. Hours went by as my aunt lay there terrified, knowing that she was about to die. As she lay there, she saw the Drowner sneak into the back door with a box of new victims in darkness. She lay there cold and freezing in the dark all night, listening to the terrifying night sounds. Just before the sun came up and she took her last breath, a miracle happened. There was this running gardener who pulled her off the dead bodies and brought her to a hospital. It took months, but the running gardener slowly healed her. Pretty scary, huh?
Oh wow, that was so scary. I'm so glad she got away.
I heard a similar story from my uncle, but it was the other way around. My uncle said the serial killer was called the Parcher.
There are a lot of them out there, but you guys are safe with me.
I know one. Have you guys ever heard of what they called the Rippers? Sometimes during a full moon, some gardeners turn into monstrous beasts with giant claws. You never know what full moon either because they don't always change on every full moon. Suddenly, one day, a Ripper will come to you and will rip you out of bed. They will use their long, horrible claws to rip and tear at your feet, scratching, clawing, gouging, and sometimes they rip your feet right off, and even use torture tools, sometimes that are even scarier than their claws, to rip your feet off. They might even just cut some of your feet off.
That can't be true.
It's true. It happened to my great-great-great-gran about 6 times now.
Well, if it is true, I don't think it will ever happen to us.
Oh yeah? Have you guys ever heard of the limb-snatching baby traders?
Sirius, don't tell them that one. It's too scary.
But I want to hear it.
I'm not scared.
See, Tara, they aren't scared. My cousin's husband, Weber, said he used to live with one of the gardeners. The gardener was a good one for a long time, and one day they just snapped. They started pulling down plant after plant, sawing and cutting off their limbs, leaving grotesque, oozy nubs behind. Then it was so sick. They would lovingly wrap them in something. I mean, like they were mummies. Then they would put them in a tomb and they would disappear. Well, a few weeks went by after this mass disfiguration, and one day they started putting new babies up. A few weeks later, the gardener went crazy again, just hacking and sawing and chopping limbs to bits. It was horrifying, leaving nubs in their wake. And again, a few weeks later, more babies showed up. And again, and again, and again. To this day, the limb-snatching baby trader is still sawing off limbs and trading them for babies.
Okay, that was pretty scary.
Did you guys hear that?
Hear what?
Listen.
It's just the wind.
Those stories were okay. They aren't even scary. If you really want a scary story, let me tell you a real scary story. Let me tell you the story of Dr. Gardenstein.
Tara, don't.
Deep in the woods, a lone gardener lived alone. They called the gardener a botanist, and they studied us. At first it was harmless, like taking our blooms off and putting them in jars and then looking at them. Later, though, they started to take our limbs off, and sometimes they would pin them on sheets of paper and hang them all around like trophies or something. Eventually, they started to cut limbs off and put them into jars, preserving them. It's like it was never enough, though. One day, they cut a limb off an old schlummy, and they put the head of another schlummy on top of it. The scientists' experiment did not work, so they did it again. This time, they fused together and were stuck that way. It was this grotesque, monstrous creature. Dr. Gardenstein screamed out, "It's alive!" like some kind of insane maniac. They didn't stop, though. They kept on and on, cutting limbs off of some plants and attaching limbs from other plants. One day, the scientists did something beyond horrifying. It was truly unforgivable. They cut off seedling heads and attached them to full-grown limbs. Some of them fused together and were these grotesque, living, monstrous creatures, deformed and ugly, while others, thankfully, did not survive the procedures. Sometimes they would even cut bits of the monsters they created off and superglue. You heard that right, superglue them onto other limbs. Dr. Gardenstein created a living, terrifying garden of horrors.
Okay, that was too scary.
Yeah. Our gardener would never do something like that, right?
All I'm going to say, kids, is never, ever go down into the basement.